No one expected Denzel Washington to show up at a congressional hearing, but when Judge Merrick Garland tried to dismiss him as just an actor, what followed wasn't a performance, it was a reckoning. In the next 5 minutes, Denzel would expose something so devastating, so buried inside the walls of the Justice Department, that Garland himself was left speechless. This wasn't Hollywood. This was accountability, and it just went viral. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The room was quiet. Not the kind of quiet that comes from boredom or routine, but the kind that grips a room right before something irreversible happens. Cameras clicked softly. Staffers shifted in their seats. Committee members whispered behind legal pads. At the center of it all, Denzel Washington sat motionless, his hands folded over a plain black folder resting on the witness table. The kind of folder that didn't come from a PR team or a political staffer, but from someone who had read every word inside it. Twice. Attorney General Merrick Garland sat across from him, expression taut, eyes measuring. There was a sense, barely hidden, that Garland had already decided this was a distraction. That a hearing meant to defend the Department of Justice's credibility had somehow turned into a stage. And the man across from him, just another actor. Chairman Jordan gavelled the room into order. Mr. Washington, you may begin with your statement. Denzel didn't speak, not at first. He simply reached for the black folder and placed it directly in front of him, slow and deliberate, like laying down a stone on a grave. The silence stretched. Even the C-SPAN cameras seemed to zoom in tighter, as if they, too, were waiting for a cue. It was Garland who broke first. "I'm not sure," he said, his voice measured, "what insights a performer can offer on prosecutorial discretion." He didn't look up when he said it. The words didn't sting. They hung in the air like dust kicked up in a courtroom just before a verdict. Denzel raised his eyes. There was no smile, no indignation, just a pause. Then his voice low and controlled. "I'm not here to perform," he said. "I'm here to ask a question, not for myself, for someone who died waiting." A murmur ran through the gallery. Reporters leaned forward. Garland's face didn't change, but his eyes narrowed ever so slightly. Denzel tapped the folder once. "This," he said quietly, "is what your department never answered. It's what the mother of a young man in Fulton County asked 6 times before he was found hanging in a holding cell after 37 months of pretrial delay." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His silence before had done the lifting. "I didn't come here as an actor," he continued. "I came here because someone needed to read this into the record and no one else would." Someone coughed in the back. A Democratic staffer shifted uncomfortably. Garland adjusted his tie, then spoke carefully. "If your concern is with an individual case, I can refer you to—" "You already did," Denzel cut in March, and again in August. Each time the family got a form letter with no human signature, just a seal. A seal doesn't hold accountability, Mr. Garland. A man does. The tension rose not because voices were raised, but because no one dared make a sound. "This isn't about my background," Denzel said, steady. "This is about yours, and the system you've sworn to protect." Garland tried to interject. "Mr. Washington." "I read scripts for a living," Denzel said. "But there's a script that keeps repeating itself in this town. Different names, same ending, delay, deny, deflect. Until the person on the other end can't speak anymore." The committee chamber had heard louder confrontations, but never one this still. Stillness that wrapped around the audience like a courtroom door locking shut. Garland exhaled tight. "Sir, the Department of Justice had every chance," Denzel replied. "And every document in this folder will show exactly how many chances were passed over." He didn't open it, not yet. Just rested a hand on it like a parent shielding a child's photograph. Something too painful to show, but too important to hide. "I came here," he said, quieter now, "because someone's son died in federal custody. And because your department couldn't find 10 minutes in 3 years to explain why." No one spoke, and for the first time that day, Merrick Garland had no answer. For a moment, no one in the room knew where to look. Garland shifted in his seat. The chairman glanced at the clock. Even the journalists, trained to remain detached, found themselves leaning forward like jurors unsure how to process what they had just heard. Denzel didn't move. His hand still rested on the black folder. His voice hadn't risen. He hadn't made accusations or declarations. He had simply drawn a line, and everyone in the room knew who stood on which side of it. There was something unsettling about the contrast between the two men. One, polished and silent, dressed in institutional grays, surrounded by decades of law school footnotes and legal precedent. The other, calm and deliberate, draped not in credentials but in lived experience. Garland represented the law as it is written. Denzel represented what people believe justice should feel like. Merrick Garland, at 71, had lived most of his professional life behind robes and sealed courtrooms. He had served as a federal judge for nearly a quarter century, known for his methodical approach, his aversion to drama, his unshakable neutrality. Even those who disagreed with him rarely accused him of partisanship. He was the man people pointed to when they wanted to believe the system could still be objective. But objectivity has a price. And sometimes that price is visibility. Denzel Washington, at 69, was no stranger to courtroom stories either. But his came in the form of characters, roles that brought to life the flaws, the fury, and the forgotten faces in the legal system. Over 4 decades, he had stepped into the shoes of men broken by injustice and men trying to uphold justice inside broken institutions. He had played defense attorneys, homicide detectives, wrongfully accused fathers, and even corrupt officers. But the roles weren't what stayed with people. What stayed was how he delivered something deeper than performance, a sense of recognition. People saw in him someone who understood the weight of being unheard. Now they sat across from each other. One spoke for the system. The other spoke for everyone it had left behind. Denzel gently opened the black folder. No theatrics, just quiet precision. He pulled out a single document, printed on government letterhead, and held it in front of him like a mirror no one wanted to look into. "This is a case file from 2019, he said. The defendant was arrested for a nonviolent tax offense. He was held in pretrial detention for 3 years and 10 months. No trial, no bail adjustment, no motion hearing. Just paperwork that kept moving in circles." He paused. His name was Malik Evans. He was 24. Somewhere in the back of the room, a reporter dropped a pen. "No official in your department," Denzel continued, turning slightly toward Garland, flagged his file as a tryst. No prosecutor noted the length of his detention as unusual. No supervisor filed an internal concern about delay. But there were 6 separate email chains recommending the case be postponed, pending political cycles and media focus on more sensitive figures. He let the phrase sit there, sensitive figures. Garland glanced toward his chief counsel, then straightened his posture. "I can't comment on ongoing internal reviews," he said, his voice flat. "This review isn't ongoing," Denzel replied. "Malik Evans is dead. He hanged himself last November. His mother found out from a newspaper. Your office sent no letter, no call. Just a data point erased from a system that never noticed him to begin with." A few members of the committee shifted, visibly uncomfortable. "This isn't about one tragedy," Denzel said. "It's about how invisible tragedy becomes when it's inconvenient. Malik didn't die because he was guilty. He died because he was forgotten. And forgetting takes effort. It takes indifference written into memos. Silence passed down through bureaucracy. Signatures without accountability." He turned a page. "This memo," he continued, dated June 4, 2022, shows a supervisor recommending no movement on Malik's case until after the midterms. The stated reason was to avoid unnecessary scrutiny on charging disparities. "That's the language your department uses, Mr. Garland, charging disparities." Garland didn't respond. "I wonder," Denzel said, his voice softening, "if you remember what it feels like to be a name on a file no one opens. Because some of us never forgot. Some of us live our whole lives trying to make sure people like Malik are seen." He placed the page down beside the folder. "2 men," he said quietly. "One raised to believe silence protects integrity, the other raised to believe silence is complicity." The air was thick again. "You don't need to defend yourself to me, Mr. Garland. You need to explain yourself to a mother who buried her son before the case even started." Still, Garland didn't speak. And in that moment, it became clear to everyone in the room, Denzel was not here to accuse. He was here to remind them what justice was supposed to sound like. Denzel didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. His silence had already rearranged the air in the room. Now, with the same calm deliberation, he reached back into the black folder and withdrew another sheet of paper. He held it without drama, just enough for the seal at the top to be clearly visible. "This is an internal email from the Department of Justice," he said, reading slowly. "Dated March 12, 2021. He paused. The subject line reads, "Timing of prosecutorial recommendations, Ray. First family cases." The body of the message states, he looked down again, "Recommend deferring any forward motion on high-profile matters related to the president's son. Advisable to avoid action during sensitive electoral climate. Risk of media distortion high. Public trust better preserved by deferral." He looked up. Garland blinked. His face didn't move, but something behind the eyes flinched. "Do you deny this document originated within your department, Mr. Garland?" Denzel asked. "I haven't reviewed that particular document," Garland began, but Denzel cut him off gently. "I'm not asking if you've reviewed it. I'm asking if you deny it came from your department." Garland's jaw tensed. "It appears to have our formatting." Denzel nodded once and reached for another page. "This," he continued, "is a memorandum from a DOJ communications strategist. Dated May 25, 2022. It outlines preparations for joint press coordination with White House media advisors." He scanned the text before reading aloud. "Given volatile response from progressive media outlets to perceived DOJ leniency, recommend aligning narrative with executive office communication strategy. Talking points to emphasize independence while minimizing coverage of specific delays. Avoid terminology suggesting leniency or favoritism. Language should affirm integrity, not fuel headlines." He set the paper down next to the first. "This was not written by an outside consultant," he said. "It was drafted by a federal employee paid with public funds. Its purpose was not justice. It was message control." Across the room, one of the Democratic aides scribbled something on a legal pad. Several reporters exchanged glances. The tone had shifted. This was no longer about one tragic case. This was about the scaffolding behind the silence. Denzel picked up a third document. He did not read it immediately. Instead, he held it like someone holding a photograph of something that should not exist. "This one is harder to read," he said, "because it pretends not to say what it says." He unfolded it carefully. "It's from a DOJ leadership roundtable. October 4th, 2021, internal use only." Then slowly he began to read. "Internal consensus. Hunter Biden case unlikely to resolve cleanly before midterms. Potential fallout manageable if narrative discipline maintained. Recommend caution in advancing timelines that intersect with key electoral events. Preference expressed for media quieting strategy. Coordinated de-emphasis via institutional partners." He paused again, not for effect, for breath. Then he asked it once more. "Mr. Garland, do you deny that this document was circulated among your senior staff?" Garland hesitated. The pause was brief, but it registered. "I don't recognize the phrasing," he said. "But the meeting date and format sound consistent with our internal practices." "Noted," Denzel replied. He spread the three documents side by side, not toward the committee, but toward Garland. "As if to say this is between you and the truth." "These aren't leaks," Denzel said. "These are artifacts, paper trails, written by hands inside your walls, sent across desks inside your offices." He looked directly at Garland. "You told the American public that the Department of Justice operates without political consideration. That phrase is in your own sworn testimony, under oath, multiple times." Garland didn't respond. "But these documents suggest something else entirely. They don't say the law was broken. They say it was bent. Quietly, carefully, in ways the public can't see but can feel when justice looks different depending on who you are." He reached for the final page in the stack. "This one," he said softly, "is the most direct." He unfolded it and read the date. November 2nd, 2022. Subject, post-election action window. Following resolution of midterm cycle, propose reevaluation of charging posture in Hunter Biden matter. Opportunity window for low-impact plea arrangement. Recommend concluding before inauguration season to minimize optics risk. Request final decision sign-off by Attorney General. He laid the document flat, then looked back at Garland. Your initials appear here, bottom right. The Attorney General leaned forward, squinting. A long silence passed before he said, "That would appear to be my notation." Denzel nodded. No theories, no accusations, just your signature and your silence. The committee room was still. No voices, no shuffling papers, only the low hum of the overhead lights. What we do with this, Denzel said, voice steady, will not define what the law allows, it will define what the law becomes. And with that, he closed the folder. But the weight of what he had opened still hung in the air. Denzel did not rush. He didn't flip papers with frustration or slam his hand on the table. What he did instead was infinitely more unsettling. He opened the folder once again and pulled out a single envelope. Its edges were worn, its seal broken. He turned it slowly in his hands, then placed it face down on the table. "This," he said, "is not a policy memo, not an internal brief, not a media strategy. It's a resignation letter. Written by a federal prosecutor who no longer believed in the system she served." He looked toward Garland, not accusingly, but with a kind of exhausted clarity. She sent this letter 3 times, once to her division head, once to the Ethics Oversight Office, once directly to the department's leadership inbox. No response, not even an automated receipt. He turned the letter over and began to read. "To whom it may concern," he said, his voice low, steady, deliberate. "I can no longer in good conscience continue my role as a federal prosecutor if the decisions I make are not guided by law but by proximity to power. I was asked to deprioritize an indictment of a low-income defendant for tax fraud in order to protect prosecutorial resources for a politically sensitive matter involving the president's son. I do not want to be part of a machine that trades the liberty of the poor to shield the powerful. I resign effective immediately." He folded the letter and placed it gently beside the stack of DOJ documents. Garland adjusted his glasses but said nothing. "I spoke to her," Denzel continued. "Last week, she asked not to be named publicly. She's taken a job working legal aid in rural Kentucky. She told me the last time she felt like a lawyer was the day she quit." The room was silent again, but it wasn't the silence of politeness. It was the silence of people trying not to feel something they weren't ready to admit. Denzel reached into the folder once more and pulled out a piece of paper folded 4 times. His fingers traced its creases for a moment before he opened it. "This one," he said, "is harder." He took a breath, then began to read. "To whoever finds me, my name is Marcus Hale. I have been in federal detention for 3 years and 2 months. My case has not moved. My lawyer says the court is waiting on DOJ direction. The guards say the paperwork keeps getting returned. I haven't seen my kids in 784 days. I am tired, I am broken, and I am invisible. If I had the last name Biden, I wouldn't still be waiting. But I don't. And I am." Denzel looked up. This letter was recovered from his cell in Atlanta. Marcus Hale was arrested for falsifying deductions on a small business tax return. He maintained his innocence. He died by suicide 2 weeks before his first hearing date. Someone in the back gasped. A low cough echoed near the door. No one moved. Denzel folded the letter once, then again. Then he said, not to Garland, not to the committee, but to the air in the room, "How many mores?" Garland shifted in his chair, his voice finally breaking the silence. "Mr. Washington," he said, with a controlled tone, "I cannot speak to individual cases. I do not involve myself in the day-to-day management of federal defendants or prosecutorial timelines." Denzel's response came without pause. "But you do approve budgets. You do sign off on task force directives. You do appoint lead prosecutors for these cases. You do authorize resource allocation models that prioritize some investigations over others. You may not pull the trigger, Mr. Garland, but you load the chamber. You assign the targets. You tell the system who matters most." Garland opened his mouth, then closed it again. Denzel placed both letters side by side on the table. Then he looked directly at Garland and asked one question. "Did Marcus Hale matter to you?" Garland did not answer. "He mattered to his kids," Denzel said, "to the pastor who wrote a letter on his behalf, to the small community where he ran a car repair shop before being accused of underreporting income. He mattered to someone, just not, apparently, to anyone with the power to prevent a 38-month delay." He paused. "Justice," he continued, "doesn't need to fail on purpose to be unjust. Sometimes it just needs to not care." The chairman tried to speak, but the weight in the room hadn't lifted yet. Denzel sat back not with triumph but with sorrow. He did not speak again for a full minute, and no one dared fill the space, not yet. Garland cleared his throat. He had sat still long enough. The weight of the letters, the stories, the folded pages now spread across the table, none of them legally damning, not on their own, but each one a shard of a deeper wound that had been festering behind institutional smiles and procedural indifference. He adjusted his glasses and allowed himself a faint smirk, one meant not for the public but for the record. "Mr. Washington," he said, his voice calm with just the hint of a smirk beneath it, "you are a gifted actor. That is not in question. But I am not convinced you understand the intricacies of federal prosecutorial discretion. There are statutory thresholds, resource allocations, judicial backlogs, and constitutional constraints that—" Denzel didn't let him finish. Not with volume, not with rage, just with presence. "I have played many roles in my life," he said evenly. "I've played a runaway slave with nothing but a scar on his back and fire in his chest. I've played a black soldier who bled for a flag that still didn't salute him back. I've played cops who tried to hold a broken line and fathers who buried their sons because someone said they looked dangerous." His voice did not rise, but it gathered. "I've played judges, I've played criminals, I've played ghosts of men this system forgot. But you know what role I've never taken, the man who knew the truth and said nothing. Because that role," Denzel said, leaning slightly forward, "has no lines. That role disappears before the credits roll. That role is silent, and today, Mr. Garland, you're performing it beautifully." There was no applause, only the kind of stillness that followed a slap that everyone heard but no one wanted to talk about. Garland's lips pressed into a thin line. Denzel did not move. He reached once more into the folder and this time pulled out a document printed not on letterhead, but from an internal scheduling calendar. "This," he said, "is from a Justice Department planning session held on November 3rd, 2022. It includes a briefing note for DOJ communications personnel attending a joint optics meeting with White House media advisors." He read slowly. "All prosecutorial decisions involving high-profile or politically sensitive subjects to be deferred until media climate stabilizes. Recommend no indictments, filings, or leaks prior to internal media sentiment analysis. Strategy advised. Hold action and prepare post-holiday rollout to avoid electoral saturation." He looked up. There it is, in writing. Justice not delayed because of law, justice delayed because of optics. Garland shifted in his seat but said nothing. Denzel continued, his voice quieter now. "You talk about constitutional constraints. I talk about human consequences. You talk about discretion. I talk about discipline. The kind that prevents an entire department from acting like it's afraid of headlines." He held up the document. "This isn't a legal strategy. It's a public relations strategy dressed up as caution. And the people who pay the price for that caution, Mr. Garland, don't have your resume. They don't have your title. They have court dates that never come and phone calls that never get answered." He paused, letting the words settle. "They have their names filed under not now until they vanish." Garland leaned forward, his voice low. "Mr. Washington, you are attributing motive where none may exist. These are complex operations. Sensitive cases often require coordinated communication." "Is that what Marcus Hale was?" Denzel interrupted. "A sensitive case." Garland blinked. Was Malik Evans. Was the prosecutor who resigned because she refused to trade one man's freedom for another man's protection. Was that coordination too? Garland looked down. He did not answer. "You want to talk about complexity," Denzel said, But let me tell you what people see from the outside. They see a son of a sitting president under investigation for years with no trial. They see everyday citizens in jail for lesser crimes, waiting in silence. And they see a Department of Justice that says it is neutral while acting like its own headlines are more sacred than the Constitution it claims to defend. He placed the document gently beside the letters. You don't need to defend your system, Mr. Garland. It already has lawyers, judges, institutions built on centuries of stone. What it doesn't have is shame. And that's what these letters are. Not accusations, not theatrics, shame in black and white. He leaned back and took one last breath before finishing. You said I was just an actor. Maybe I am. But even actors know when a scene no longer makes sense. When the audience starts shifting in their seats. When the lines stop ringing true. And when that happens, you only have two choices. You can rewrite the story. Or you can keep performing it until no one believes a word you say. Garland sat frozen. And Denzel Washington, a man who came with no title, no subpoena, and no official capacity, had just rewritten the scene for everyone to see. Denzel reached for the final section of the folder. This time there was no document to wave, no paper to unfold, just a list. A single page typed with names and numbers beside them. He held it with the kind of care someone might give to a page torn from a family Bible. He looked at Garland for a long moment before he spoke. How many cases, Mr. Garland, he asked, have been delayed under your leadership past the point of standard pretrial procedure for reasons unrelated to legal necessity? Garland hesitated, then offered a diplomatic shrug. I don't have that information in front of me. No, Denzel said, but I do. He raised the page and let his voice carry just slightly across the microphone. 137. He let it hang there. 137 federal cases delayed more than 30 months with no trial, no verdict, and no meaningful justification offered to the defense. Delayed not because of new evidence, not because of procedural complexity, but because of bureaucratic indecision, political caution, or what internal memos called narrative risk. Garland's face remained composed, but his hands clenched slightly against the desk. Denzel began to read. Case 1. Reuben Cole, 43 years old, held in federal custody without trial for tax-related charges, missed his father's funeral, attempted suicide twice, still awaiting trial. He looked up. Do you remember that name? Garland did not respond. Denzel continued. Case 2. Fatima James, 32, single mother of 2, charged with benefits fraud after a data mismatch. 16 continuances, still no court date. Children placed in state care. Still silence. Case 3. Archero Mendes, veteran, Bronze Star recipient. Arrested in 2019 for a regulatory violation related to his contracting firm. 3 years later, no charges dropped, no verdict reached. Just limbo. He placed the page down slowly. I have all 137 names here, Mr. Garland. I could read them all, their stories, their broken timelines. Their children's birthdays missed. Their records permanently stained by a system that can delay indefinitely without explanation. Garland tried to speak, but Denzel gently raised his hand. I'm not here to overwhelm you. I'm here to ask a simpler question. He leaned in. Do you remember any of their names? Garland blinked. His lips parted slightly, then closed again. Denzel repeated, quieter now. Any of them, one. The Attorney General remained still. Denzel nodded slowly. That's the difference between you and me, between your department and the people watching from home. You see a backlog, a case load, a procedural complexity, but to them, these are their fathers, their sisters, their neighbors. Their lives on pause. He tapped the paper once. I remember them because someone had to, and today that someone is me. He sat back in his chair. He wasn't angry. He wasn't theatrical. He was simply tired. Garland looked down at the table, not out of guilt, but as if searching for a place to rest his eyes that wouldn't stare back at him. Denzel's voice softened once more. Justice is not just the punishment of the guilty. It's the dignity of the forgotten. And what we forget, Mr. Garland, reveals who we really are. The room was silent, because no one had anything left to say. The moment Denzel stood up, the room didn't quite know what to do. No gavels slammed. No official adjournment echoed from the committee chair. There was just silence, a heavy, bewildered silence, as he closed the black folder with the kind of finality usually reserved for funerals, not politics. He did not thank the committee. He did not ask to add anything to the record. He simply nodded once respectfully and turned to leave. But something happened in that instant. A ripple. A journalist from the New York Times dropped his pen trying to reach for his phone. A young congressional aide standing near the exit suddenly remembered to breathe. A veteran prosecutor seated behind Garland whispered, almost involuntarily, "My God." And then it began. Whispers turned into murmurs. Murmurs turned into questions, from both sides of the aisle. Staffers, legal observers, even a few stone-faced lawmakers began scrolling their screens as alerts popped up. Something was happening online. The clip of Denzel reading Marcus Hale's final letter had already hit the internet, raw, unedited, filmed by someone in the room and uploaded without context. It didn't need context, it needed truth. By the time Denzel reached the hallway, hashtags had already started trending. Justice for 137, names not numbers, and simply Denzel. Garland remained seated, still staring down at the table. No one asked him to stay. No one moved to comfort him. The Attorney General, who once symbolized institutional steadiness, now looked like the lone man at the epicenter of a storm he didn't see coming. Because storms don't announce themselves to men who live above them. Back inside the committee room, the chairman finally tapped his mic. It squealed. His voice cracked as he tried to wrap up the hearing, but no one was listening anymore. The hearing was over. The story had left the room. Within minutes, a new letter appeared online, posted to X, the platform formerly known as Twitter. A resignation again, this time from a federal prosecutor in Philadelphia. He wrote, "I became a prosecutor to fight for fairness. But I cannot reconcile my oath with a department that delays justice for political convenience while telling the public to trust its process. Today, I resign. If Denzel Washington can speak truth in a room built to silence it, the least I can do is stop pretending my silence helps anyone." His post was shared more than 100,000 times in the first hour. Outside the Capitol, Denzel didn't stop for cameras. He didn't wave to crowds. There was no entourage. Just one young assistant trailing behind him, fumbling with a phone, trying to keep up. And then, as they reached the bottom of the steps, a camera caught it. The words, not staged, not shouted, just said softly, clearly into the air. "Justice doesn't need a script," Denzel said. "It needs someone willing to speak when others can't anymore." The assistant looked up at him, unsure if he was supposed to say something back. He didn't, because nothing needed to be said. That clip went viral too, but it wasn't dramatic, it wasn't polished, it was just quiet, and sometimes that's what truth looks like. In the days that followed, more names surfaced, more letters, judges reopened old cases. Advocacy groups launched petitions. Congressional offices were flooded with calls from constituents asking for hearings to resume, this time with oversight. But Denzel didn't go on a press tour. He didn't host interviews or sign op-eds. He went home, back to the quiet. Back to the life of a man who had learned something the hard way, that power doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers. And sometimes the most dangerous silence is the one that comes dressed in legal language and good intentions. He didn't need a stage. He had already delivered the final line. And America, for once, heard it.